Excelentíssimas senhoras, excelentíssimos senhores, bem-vindos ao segundo dia do Ciência 2025. Iniciamos hoje com a sessão plenária Biodiversidade e Desenvolvimento Sustentável, onde se irão discutir os desafios e oportunidades na conservação da biodiversidade, em articulação com os objetivos de desenvolvimento sustentável. Para moderar este painel, chamamos a palco Mónica Bettencourt Dias, do Instituto Gulbenkian de Medicina Molecular, bem como os oradores Henrique Pereira, Centro de Investigação em Biodiversidade e Recursos Genéticos da Universidade do Porto, Helena Freitas, professora catedrática de Biodiversidade e Ecologia na Universidade de Coimbra, e Joana Gaspar de Freitas, subeditora no Centro de História da Universidade de Lisboa.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. Bom dia a toda a gente. Good morning, everyone. So, welcome to this plenary session on biodiversity and sustainable development. And my name is Mónica Bettencourt Dias, and I have the pleasure of guiding this conversation with our speakers and with you. So, biodiversity loss is often framed as an environmental issue, but what we will explore today, and I was very happy when I was given this panel of people, it's really a multidisciplinary discussion because this is really a multidisciplinary problem. So it's really an issue of a scientific, social, historical, political, and economical challenge for all of us. And protecting biodiversity is not just about nature, but it's really about resilience of our societies, our economies, and our collective future. And so that's why we have these three fantastic speakers that come from different areas of science and history to cover this problem from multiple angles. I think they've been more or less introduced, but we cover with Henrique, who will start, and who comes from IDIV in Germany and CBU in Portugal, and is really a leading voice in biodiversity monitoring and rewilding strategy, which he will talk about. And he was also the former director of the Peneda Genês National Park, and is a lead author for IPBES and many other things. And then we'll have Helena Freitas from Coimbra, who has loads of experience in connecting biodiversity, ecosystem services, and public policy, and who represents Portugal in many international platforms for biodiversity, but also she's deeply engaged in science in society at multiple levels, in policy, as an MP, etc., many different things. And finally, we have Joana Gaspar from the University of Lisbon, who has a really interesting ERC project, Sea, Sand, and People, who exploring the historical ecology of coastal environments, human-nature interactions, and resilience of dune systems, and combining history, science, and policy insights to guide coastal management under global challenge and change. So today, with these speakers, we'll explore this, how science, history, and policy come together in shaping a sustainable future. And I'm really curious about what our speakers will tell us. We'll have Henrique, then Helena, then Joana speaking. Afterwards, we'll have a few questions, but the idea is really to open to your questions and discussion overall. So we'll start with Henrique. Thank you, Henrique.
Okay. I don't know if the presentation comes up. Here we go. Ora, bom dia. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here today. So I wanted to thank first for the invitation to come and talk about one of my favorite topics. And I would like to start by looking at what is the current situation regarding biodiversity. Last year, we published the first large intermodal comparison for biodiversity and ecosystem services worldwide. And what we did, this was the work that we started in 2017, but it took us a few years to complete, was using all the available global biodiversity models and global ecosystem services models, we tried to reconstruct what had happened in the 20th century and look a bit at scenarios of what could happen this century. And what we found is that we had an extraordinary 20th century. And it is extraordinary in the sense of the changes we have done to our planet. When the 20th century started, the population was slightly below 2 billion people on our planet. Now we are 8 billion. We have increased the population 4 times during this period. Well, if you increase your population 4 times, you have to feed 4 times more people. So we had a true miracle happening during the 20th century, because in the 1960s there were some concerns that we would not be able to feed this increasing population. There is a book from Paul Ehrlich called The Population Bomb that says that billions of people will starve to death. But there was a miracle that was the Green Revolution that really allowed us to increase this production, this food production. We also increased timber production between 400 and 500% during the 20th century. Now, this has come at the cost of deforestation, at the cost of loss of natural habitats, and at the cost of biodiversity and regulating ecosystem services. So this miracle of the Green Revolution was not costless. There were really huge impacts on biodiversity, and we had huge losses of biodiversity during the 20th century. Depending on the metric you use, biodiversity is a complex concept, easy and complex, and there are many metrics, but you can calculate that between 2 and 10% of biodiversity was lost in the last century. But it was not only biodiversity. The long-term sustainability of these gains that we have done in food and feed production and the benefits we obtain from ecosystems have also been threatened and deteriorated, with large impacts on the nitrogen cycle, negative impacts on the nitrogen cycle, pollination services, even a slight negative impact on the ecosystem carbon sequestration of ecosystems. So what about for this century? So we looked at some scenarios, as they are called the shared socioeconomic pathways. And we looked at a bunch of metrics. Again, this is some of the biodiversity metrics you see there on the left, and the map of those metrics and the change in number of species. One of the metrics, local species richness, number of species lost per decade. And what we see is that if we consider only land use change, we don't expect to see the same level of biodiversity loss this century as we had last century. And one of the reasons for that is that the population growth is really slowing down. And some population models say that we're going to hit peak population around 2050, 2060. And so if that happens, and if we start being able to, let's say, we even have maybe a demographic crisis in many countries, because we are doing this maybe too fast, this control of the population growth. But it's not likely. These are like historical is the last 20th century, global sustainability, regional rivalry, fossil fuel development has 3 scenarios. The models are the different dots. And you see that none of the scenarios really says we're going to have as much loss. In reality, in one of the scenarios is global sustainability, where the population growth is achieved, control of population growth is achieved faster. You even have some improvements in biodiversity intactness. And you can see that in this map. These blue areas are areas where there is maybe some improvement of biodiversity during this century. Well, but there's another challenge, and that you hear everybody every day in the news, and that's climate change. And climate change is here. It's, I think, most of us are aware that we are feeling it. When I plotted this figure, I was amazed that if you look at the period between 1970 and 2050, if we are in the lowest climate change trajectory called RCP 1.9 here, 2.6, I'm sorry, RCP 2.6, most of the change already happened. Most of the change in climate already happened. That's extraordinary. We have already a lot of change in climate in the last decades. And when you plot that in terms of combining the effects of land use and climate change, it's likely that we may have greater biodiversity loss this century than last century. And this is the challenge. Yes, we are able to now maybe reduce the impacts of land use change, but now we're getting hit by the impacts of climate change, what is also a bit sad, but tells us that these climate change impacts are a new challenge that we also need to address if we want to protect biodiversity ecosystem services. So, really aware of these countries and also the European Union have set an ambitious set of goals called the Global Biodiversity Framework, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This is the third set of such goals. Since the inception of the Convention on Biological Diversity was in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, there has been goals every decade that have been systematically not met. This is the last attempt. It was this Global Biodiversity Framework with a bunch of targets for 2030 and the vision of living in harmony with nature by 2050. And Europe is really taking a leadership role here, and it has its own biodiversity strategy, the EU Biodiversity Strategy, that is extremely ambitious and says, for instance, we should, by the end of the decade, they have a minimum 30% of land and sea protected with ecological corridors, and 10% of that, this is an extraordinary target. I'll show you in a moment why. 10% of it should be strictly protected. And last year, for the first time in almost 30 years, we had a new EU law on biodiversity. It's called the Nature Restoration Regulation that sets the aim that 20% of land and sea surface needs to be covered by restoration plans by the end of the decade. So very ambitious goals to address this biodiversity crisis from the EU. So one of the things that we may think about on how to address this crisis is think about positive scenarios. And in IPBES, we have been working in something that we call nature futures. And the nature futures is a framework to develop scenarios that are positive for both people and nature. And they are designed in around three main types of values or perspectives regarding how we perceive nature. If I ask different people in the audience, they perceive biodiversity and nature slightly different. And what people want from nature is not all the same. But we identified these three main dimensions, what we call nature for nature. This is the idea of intrinsic values of nature, this idea of having wildness, ecological integrity. Nature for society, this idea that you want to get the benefits for people like ecosystem services, natural capital, bioeconomy. And this idea of nature as culture where you cannot separate people and nature. We also call it one with nature, very connected to indigenous and local knowledge, but also to many of the cultural landscapes we have in Europe. And we have been working in IPBES in bringing up some scenarios that maximize each of these aspects of nature and see how he could reach that. And one of them is based on a phenomenon that has been going on over the last few decades. That is, as population growth declines or even starts to be reversed, and we see a more efficient agriculture in many areas of the world, there is a lot of areas that are under abandonment in globally. Europe is the areas where we expect more abandonment to happen up to 2040 globally. Major areas are being less used for agriculture than they were. Sometimes completely abandoned, sometimes there's a transition to other less intensive uses. And so a few years ago, we edited a book called Rewilding European Landscapes, proposing that we could take this on this opportunity of farmland abandonment to rewild large areas of Europe. So what is rewilding? Rewilding is the management of ecological succession with the goal of restoring natural ecosystem processes and reducing the human control of landscapes. It recognizes the dynamic and unpredictable nature of ecosystems, so it's different from other aspects of restoration where you try to restore ecosystems to a certain state. Rewilding embraces some unpredictability on the end point of the restoration trajectory and emphasizes the emotional experience of enjoying wild nature. And so this was done with Leticia Navarro, that was my co-editor of this book at the time. This has really, not only because of this book, of course, but really has become a big trend in Europe in the last 10 years. When we started talking about this, there was almost an apocryphal idea, and today there is regular press coverage of this topic. And there is funding for this, there is funding for research in this area, there is foundations doing this. We have a Rewilding Europe, we have even a Rewilding Portugal that is doing interventions here in many places in Portugal. So this really has picked up speed as an approach to manage nature in Europe. So a bit more about the science of rewilding. There is, let's say, different flavors of rewilding. For instance, the one that we advocate in the book I showed is what we call ecological rewilding, that is mainly based on farmland abandonment. There's another flavor of rewilding that is what's called trophic rewilding. It's based on the role of large herbivores that are missing from our ecosystems. We got rid of all large herbivores in Europe. The largest herbivore we have right now in Portugal are deer. Yeah, there is nothing larger than that. And we have the auroch, that is the ancestor of the cattle. We have horses, wild horses, and we have, if we go back, further back, for this we only need to go back a few hundred years. If you go further back, you had much larger herbivores. And so there is a flavor called trophic rewilding. And there was, let's say, different ideas of interpreting this concept, and we brought together a group a few years back to bring these concepts together and propose a conceptual framework, and we identified there are three aspects of ecological systems that rewilding intervenes on. One is this trophic complexity, restoring the trophic complexity and trophic function. If you have some species there, but they are not playing a role, functional role, it's not good. We need to have it having an effect. So the herbivores need to be at the density that they have an effect on the ecosystem. Dispersal. We want species to be able to move into the landscapes. So landscapes are fragmented, and rewilding is about restoring connectivity. Restoring stochastic disturbances. What we do when we manage ecosystems, we try to stop any unpredictability. The big enemy of a farmer is the unpredictability of the weather, for instance. So you try to control as much as you can unpredictability. In rewilding, we embrace the unpredictability of ecosystems because things like floods, fire, even disease, pests create new opportunities for biodiversity. So we embrace those kind of stochastic disturbances. And should we rewild or not, that's an option. That's an option that society needs to be doing based on the different benefits or nature contributions of people. We need to look at, if you're going to rewild a given area, what are the loss and benefits in terms of non-material benefits, in terms of regulating benefits, in terms of material benefits. So this is some example of trophic complexity and the role of our fauna in Europe. I like always to speak about the importance of vultures and how they do a lot of the cleaning of the sanitation of our landscapes for us. But these are some other examples there, from the lynx to the bison to the bears, on the trophic complexity, and also how much forcing the humans are doing the ecosystems, because the idea in rewilding is kind of, if you love biodiversity, you kind of let it free, so you set back, and so you're trying to not have a lot of interventions in terms of inputs and outputs. So the least rewilded place is industrial agriculture, and you want to move towards this green area where you have low inputs and outputs and high connectivity, high traffic complexity, and high stochasticity of ecosystems. And this is work done with Nestor Fernandez and Aurora Torres. Rewilding is applicable across scales. This is one of the coolest things I've seen in this, let's say, in this work. That some people thought, oh, this is only, you only can do this if you have large areas, tens of thousands of hectares. In reality, you can do this in your city, in your park. And there is a huge movement now about how to rewild city parks. Big discussion in Leipzig, for instance. There is a big discussion between two camps, the rewilding camp and the classic conservation biology camp and conservation botanists. Because they say, well, we need to maintain the management of this alluvial forest because there is all these endangered species, and there is a bottom-up movement from the citizens of the cities. No, we want this area to be reflooded naturally. We want the ecosystem process to happen here. So it's interesting how the citizens are also taking up on rewilding. They're very, very interesting. So you can do that at small scales to very large scales. And you can do this across systems. That's another thing. We just published this paper last month in Frontiers in Ecology and the Environment. And it's about how some of these ideas can be applied to agricultural systems. There is a big challenge there. But some of these ideas can be also applicable to agricultural ecosystems, and to go beyond this oversimplified paradigm of land sharing versus land sparing, to think about how to really do local scale management and landscape scale management that brings more biodiversity into landscapes. We have looked at what is the public perception about rewilding. This is a study we published last year on something called choice experiments. If you are an economist, you may have come across this. And we were really surprised about this. These are different components of rewilding: stochastic disturbances, dispersal, and trophic complexity. And what we work on, and this is willingness to pay. How much people are willing to pay to restore a given component? And what is extraordinary here is that we thought there will be maybe an intermediate level of restoration people will be happy with. Maybe you don't want the river to be too wild, or maybe you don't want the forest to be too natural. But when we look at the survey, people always went for the wildest landscapes. This was extraordinary. This is slightly different. If you are in a local, we compare a national survey with a local survey. If you are talking about your backyard, you say, well, not too wild. It's just a bit wild, but not wild. But if you are doing the national survey, they go all the way to the most wild. So we have been working with, in science policy, in rewilding, with conservation agencies, with NGOs. For instance, we did this report a few years back. That was one of the reports that I think laid the groundwork for the Nature Restoration Regulation, Rewilding Europe participating, EEB, BirdLife, WWF. This work was for me very interesting because it really opened my eyes to the Brussels lobbying. I didn't realize how big Brussels lobbying is. Of course, there is Brussels lobbying for agriculture, for forestry, for all energy, etc. But there is also Brussels lobbying for conservation and for environment. It's very, very interesting. We have a bunch of projects right now ongoing on this, and Nature Connect and Wild. I'm just going to show you a couple of results from these projects. One is this idea that we need to identify areas to connect Natura 2000 sites to improve this dispersal of animals, and that we need to identify more places for strict protection. Right now, the estimates say that we are around 1 to 2% strict protection in Europe, and the target says 10%. Is extremely ambitious target, and we have to do a lot of progress there if you want to even meet it partially across Europe. So in Nature Connect, we are examining where we could place some of these strict protection areas in Europe and where we could have these corridors placed also. It's a big consortium of partners around Europe that are participating in this project. The other idea is that I started by mentioning that we have right now this new challenge of climate change. So can we address the biodiversity crisis together with climate change? And we're talking about something that we call climate smart rewilding. And in climate smart rewilding, we have the same three components on biodiversity. You're acting on dispersal, you're acting on stochastic disturbances, you're acting on traffic complexity. But now you think about how can we influence climate? How can you maximize climate adaptation? How can you maximize climate mitigation? How can you improve also the benefits while minimizing the risks? I'm going to just give you two examples of this. One is for climate adaptation. In the base map here is the potential net primary productivity of ecosystems. And that's a measure of how much carbon they can take out from the atmosphere. And you see, for instance, in Central Europe, there is more potential for primary productivity than, let's say, in the Meseta, in the Iberian Meseta. This is like bioclimatic conditions. And in green areas that are undergoing abandonment. And you can see that from the point of view of climate mitigation, what you want is to have areas that have high potential primary productivity, that you really speed up this abandonment or speed up the transition to more carbon-rich vegetations. And so those are the areas with dark green in this figure. We can also look at the benefits and conflicts. On the left side is the base map in gray colors is how far people are willing to travel from big population centers to see wildlife. So for instance, there is a lot of people in London and a lot of people in Paris, but there's no wildlife to see. There's no social benefit there because there is no wildlife to see. Blue areas is areas where we currently have a lot of wildlife, and pink, these violet areas are areas where wildlife is expanding. We have really something what's called the wildlife comeback. Populations of wolf, bears, deer, etc. are expanding across Europe. And so when you meet this expansion with this population being able to go and enjoy wildlife or travel to see it, these are the dark violet colors there. this is your maximum social benefit. But at the same time, there is also social risks. We have to be honest about the challenge of this. If I'm a farmer, I don't want to have wolves around, or I don't have to have bears around. And so in the second graph, we identify the base map, the grayscale, is the density of livestock. And the same is imposed, the dispersal of carnivores. And you see that many of these areas that could be rewilded, it will be interesting from a point of view of people going and enjoying wildlife and watching wildlife. There are a lot of farmers there that want to see it. And so these are also conflicts, and we have to really recognize these conflicts between different stakeholders. So I wanted to finish in a personal and positive note. A lot of my interest in conservation comes from my passion for the National Park of Peneda Gerês. When I started doing research there in the 90s, there was barely any wild boars, roe deers. The wolf population was also in the poor condition than it is today. And just in the last 30 years, we have been seeing a huge expansion of wildlife in Peneda Gerês and in other areas in Portugal. And this is because nature conservation really works. So I don't know if this can work, the video. I don't know if in the Regi they can play the video. Because what you can see here you go. This is from one of our camera traps. We have a long-term monitoring of camera traps. And it's quite a view. Seeing a wolf in this area is quite a view. And I think we owe a lot of this recovery to the conservation policies that we started implementing in the 1970s in Portugal and in Europe. And hopefully we don't go back on the conservation of the wolf in the next few years. There is a bit of a threat about that. And I can tell you about the story and the pony of Ursula von der Leyen if you want to hear about why there is a threat. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Henrique. So we move to Helena. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Save your questions to the end, please, so don't forget them. Write them down.
Well, thank you very much for this invitation to join the panel. And I mean, it was my challenge is somehow to bring, complementary insights into what has been just said by Henrique without knowing what he was what was he going to say, but trying to guess. So I will basically in 10 minutes present some of what I think are the challenges that are really complementary in a way to what has been said, and bridging biodiversity and the challenges for sustainable development in our future. So in a way, I apologize because, well, some of the insights are probably overlapping what has been said, but it's normal. So I will do my best to manage in between the two Freitas as well. So we have two Freitas in the panel, not we are family, but I will try to bridge it. So as it was just said, and we were pretty much aware that we have a huge challenge of a transformation of the planet, this scale, the magnitude of this impact of several events that are ongoing over the last, 60, 70 years are obviously known, and more, that's what we call the Anthropocene. It's this great acceleration that started a few decades ago, and it is imposing a number of impacts that we all perceive, and one that is becoming more and more clear to everyone is nature and the impact of our development in nature. That's why I've decided to bring, in terms of complementary insights, what it is called in the IPAS narrative, a nexus. And I think that is very important in terms of addressing sustainability and conservation of nature, that it's very important to perceive this as a nexus movement of the changes. It's not only about biodiversity, it's about water, it's about food, it's about health, it's about climate change. And of course, the first and major challenge that we have to face, and that has already been said, is climate change. And of course, climate change connects to nature in many ways, and these crises are, of course, connected, and we won't solve the nature crisis without solving climate crisis. And this is becoming really a huge challenge for humanity, and there will be no sustainability without the addressing climate change at the global, regional, and local level. And indeed, one of the critical issues is carbon cycle, and we all know that carbon cycle is very much related to biodiversity, to nature, and that we can, in a way, use the way how we relation with nature, with carbon cycle, and from that, I always remember, that it's probably worth to mention, that when I was planning to do my postdoc back in the 90s, and I was planning to do carbon sequestration in plants in these big phase experiments, and when I was applying for a postdoc grant to FCT in the 90s to go and to do these experimental trials on carbon sequestration by plants, then my grant at the first stage was refused because I was not working in climate change. And fortunately, these days we understand the role of what is the carbon cycle and the role that nature and the most precisely plants play in this carbon cycle. So carbon cycle is going to be, is going to be at the center of the economy and at the center of the sustainability agenda. So this is going to be, critical whenever addressing whatever we will address in terms of nature conservation has to deal with carbon cycle. And then, of course, what is the project? But it was already some of the scenarios, and we pretty much realize what is happening in terms of the impact of climate change in the temperature and the global warming. Well, last week I was in Murcia, in the south of Spain, facing 47 degrees in our last heat wave, and I could see, but this is also about sustainability and biodiversity. We were facing this huge, heat wave, which is happening, and it will happen more and more often. And at the same time, I had the chance to see the pollution in the river, what is going to happen with the river Tagus and the water that is going to be transported from the river Tagus to this part of Spain, and at the same time, the expansion of the avocado culture is still ongoing, even though it's very clear that the water situation is not really supporting this option in terms of the transformation of the farming system. So this is sustainability and conservation of biodiversity. So we are in a way destroying what is left in terms of soil capacity, water cycle. So this is not, of course, a way to proceed. So this is going to be a major challenge because, of course, biodiversity and nature is suffering the same heat impact as we are. And probably, and in many cases, we don't know what are the impacts of this heat stress in the biology in general, and this is a critical aspect. Plants do suffer heat stress, and all other organisms do suffer heat stress. And just as because I was predicting that Henrique would address ecosystem services, so I basically skip it. But just as a clear message, so I just brought a couple of key messages, but related to climate change, this is one example that could happen when we face what is now very clear, the picture of 2 degrees of increase of global warming. You can see what is happening, for example, in one of the ecosystems that we study, and we understand what is happening in terms of impact, and most probably this is one of the ecosystems that is going to be, probably erased from the planet due to climate change. So I would also like to bring this because there's a big change, the cascading effect of climate change in terms of the functioning of ecosystems, and a lot of species that are connected and disconnected. And this is just an example of one area that we know very well in Mozambique, this part of Africa, where this is where we have, for example, the mangroves that used to support and to mitigate the impact of climate change, and this part of the world is going to face increasing number of hurricanes and the big change of the conditions of the atmosphere, the climate here. And of course, mangroves used to be, in a way, ecosystems that were helpful in terms of mitigation of the impact of climate change. But it's not only that. This case I brought because one of the aspects that climate change is going to bring us in is the impact in terms of disease and spread of diseases that were not expected to be. And this is connected to biodiversity, because when we simplify ecosystems and at the same time we have the stress caused by climate change, then we are not prepared to survive in these conditions. And of course, the places in the world where we'll have most of the problems, unfortunately, are those where communities are less prepared to face the impact of this situation. And this is just another concern that we have. A key message is regarding the new emerging zoonotic diseases. This is United Nations work from the end of 2024, and you can see it is highly predictable that we will face another pandemic in the next decade. And of course, this science is more and more working, and there's in these aspects, it is more and more perceived that the number of these outbreaks will be connected to the loss of nature that is also part of this nexus of events that are together playing a role in this transformation of the planet. And of course, connected again to biodiversity and sustainability is the drought, and the state of climate of drought you can see. So this is one of the risks that is increasing. Whenever we talk about drought, of course, it's again nature and the impact of nature, and the picture is starting to be quite clear, and a lot of different ecosystems are really, it will be extremely difficult to preserve, for example, wetlands and a lot of our aquatic ecosystems when we don't have water. A number of species or groups like amphibians, we know they need, of course, water to accomplish their life cycle. If we don't have water, and many of these places where we are facing drought conditions is where we have our best wetlands, and we know what is happening, for example, in the center of Brazil, the center of Latin America, regarding this aspect. And just because we are producing a number of different, and just last week we had in the Academy of Science of Lisbon an example of a report that was done with the support of the European Academy of Sciences, and it is, the picture is very clear. It's going to happen in terms of forests, and it is worth to mention that last week a very interesting paper was, could claim that in Europe, north and the center of Europe, our forests are not anymore sinks of carbon, so we are losing a very important fraction of sink of carbon, and that is, of course, related to the loss of forest connected to big fires, and fires are going to be, again, part of our future, and whenever we have fires, we are losing, of course, nature, and it will be more and more difficult. Even the rewilding is a challenge when you have, for example, when you lose soil matter and the soil condition that can really preserve life. So there's all these aspects, and so when we prepare and we anticipate what, going to, but I don't have time for that. And then, of course, the conservation itself and the plans that we should have at the world level. Henrique just mentioned the Kunming-Montreal Protocol, the 30-30 initiative and the restoration, all these big laws that we are fortunately, I mean, we at least it's we expect really to make them work, but at the same time, this is just a short overview of some of the species that we are really in. We expect to lose this by the end of the decade. And then what is our framework? And again, Henrique just said, and I'm very much supportive of this nature contributions to people framework. We have the challenge to apply it in our economies in general. So we have to put nature, we have to bring nature into the economy, into the national economy as much as possible, and we are doing our best to promote. I'm sorry, so I just went, okay, because I think it's, yeah, I'm out of time, so I don't have time for that. But anyway, this framework is going, there's our critical framework for the economy, at the same time, of course, crossing biodiversity, climate, and people, but I leave people to Joanna, I think. So, but anyway, this is the nature-based solutions are, of course, one of the frameworks that is going to be essential to address conservation of nature in the national economy. As it has been said, cities, 70% of the communities are living in the cities. Cities are, of course, we have to bring nature to the center of the city. Of course, our cities in Portugal keep killing trees and keep removing trees, which is a shame. We have to care for nature. If you want to bring nature into the city, we have to care for it. It's not the same. We cannot proceed the same way as before. So we do have to care for nature wherever we exist, wherever we want nature to be. So just to finish, I don't have time. I think that this concept, this framework, the planetary health, and it's, of course, we tend to forget pollution. But pollution is also one of the big agendas that we should put, and whenever we discuss biodiversity and nature, pollution is critical. We cannot keep producing the chemicals, delivering into the ecosystems a lot of chemicals, contaminants that are really destroying life, our life and other species' life. And this is, this, if you see the pictures, is really, so we have to change our way of living because everything is connected. And this is a very strong scientific agenda, and it's going to be more and more relevant for our future. Everything is connected, from soils to plants, organisms. Whatever you eat, if you don't have an healthy ecosystem, you cannot be healthy. So this is, so to become healthier communities, we do need to keep healthy, because to have healthy ecosystems. So, and that's what is another tremendous challenge, and probably the central one. It is going to be the transformation of the food system. So we have, we cannot feed people the same way, we cannot feed ourselves the same way. This is a huge challenge that is going to need a lot of science. We need a lot of science in this transformation of the food system. And I really, I would like to call more and more the support of science, the Portuguese science, for the transformation of the food system. We don't have yet, an agroecological plan at the national level, and we need it because we cannot pursue, contaminating waters, destroying soils, and producing food the same way as before. We have to be more intelligent than that, and we need a change in this field. We cannot, support biodiversity without this huge change. So I'm a big promoter of the agroecological agenda. I think that we need ecological science, ecological knowledge to change the food system. I don't have time to do, but this is another framework, and I think there is more and more, and it's also connecting people. It has the No, okay, I will finish. So agroecological practices enhance soil fertility, eliminate the need for synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. This is a very strong agenda that I would like to leave you with this, because I think that we are not going to protect nature without changing the food system. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Helena. So we move to Joana.
Good morning. I don't know if I need this. Let's start. Well, with my presentation that should be here. Nope. I will start without the presentation.
It's there.
Oh, here it is. When we talk about climate and environmental issues, we normally speak about the present, or we think about the future. And like we heard in the other presentations, it's nature, science, and technology, some innovation. But we never consider history. The past is always something, a knowledge outdated, old, that we already know. We never have historians or people from the humanities when we are discussing climate issues or restoration. So, what is the role of history in all this? I will make my case for history today here using the case of dunes. Dunes are amazing systems. They are considered very valuable because they work as protections for coastal areas. And we are building dunes, and I brought you some examples from Portugal, because they work as buffer areas against sea level rise and flooding. And this is considered a very innovative solution, a working with nature solution that has been developed and implemented in the last decades. New? I don't think it's new. In fact, people have been using dunes and wetlands as buffer areas for centuries. In this map from the 18th century France, you can see that people did not live on the coast. In fact, they knew that the coast was quite dangerous. So they lived behind the dunes and the wetlands. This is an example from the 14th century in England. People knew that they had to protect the vegetation that was growing on the dunes. This is a case of a man that went to court because he was cutting the vegetation that grew in the dunes. And this was a crime, because that put in danger the stability of the dunes that protected the village where he lived. He was fined by paying 4 cows, which was quite expensive for his crime. Also, today we are protecting the dunes and restoring dunes using fences and planting vegetation. This is not new as well. We know this for centuries, and we developed this method in the 19th century. And this is one of the examples. We are doing exactly the same that people have been doing at least for the last 200 years. So this is not exactly innovative or new knowledge. It's quite old. But things change. This is the example of the dune of Pela, the highest dune in Europe. It is considered exceptional, a natural monument, a site protected site. It's quite amazing, that huge dune of white sand, bare sand. But in the 18th century and the 19th century, people did not like this dune. In fact, they were afraid of this dune because this dune was moving and invading their fields and their villages. So bare sand was not something attractive and iconic like we consider that today. And so they planted all the forests that you see around the dune to protect from the dune and also to make all those dune areas more productive because bare sand and dunes were considered wastelands in the 19th century by engineers and foresters. Things changed at the 20th century. Like Enrique said, the 20th century is quite exceptional because the scale of the change has been huge and very, very fast. Today, we consider that dunes are iconic landscapes. We protect them. And we think that they should, or at least in some countries and in some areas where they have been more stable, like the UK and the Netherlands and other North European countries. So there's a lot of projects to renaturalize the dunes, to change the state where they are now to a different state where they can be more mobile. But they are doing this renaturalization using big machinery and changing all the ecosystem to develop something different. Not all scientists agree with this. They consider that using herbicides or even heavy machinery to change dunes from stable condition to mobile condition is quite a huge impact. And in fact, they are talking about gardening dunes. We are treating dunes like they are our own garden. So not everyone, even today, believes or considers the same kind of rehabilitation for the dunes. Scientists have different visions for the dunes, and that means also different uses and ways of changing these ecosystems. I'm a historian. I don't have the scientific skills to evaluate what is good and bad for dunes. What I know from reading historical documents and for examining closely the relationship of people and dunes in the last centuries is that our ideas about the dunes have changed and that we have shaped them according to what we think they should be or can be used for. And what I see in these documents is that we have been manipulating ecosystems according to our human values, because we always act to protect our own interests. And as you can see here, we consider nature, in this case the dunes, but it can be any other system, according to ideas of bad and good nature. We want stable dunes, sometimes we want them to be mobile, we are afraid of them, and other occasions we consider that they are quite valuable. Plenaria is a kind of vegetation that grows in the dunes. It had several uses in the past, so it was cut and to feed animals, for instance, but it was also protected and planted. Sometimes it's considered to be exotic outside Europe, it's native in Europe, and all these ideas about the dunes have an impact in the way we use them. Also rabbits or cattle. Rabbits can be a plague on the dunes, cattle can be forbidden of grazing, but now we are also introducing cattle and consider that rabbits are quite useful because they control the vegetation. What I mean is, we are talking, and when we talk about biodiversity and sustainable development, we are talking about nature and people, but most of the people here only works about nature. What about people? Who studies people? If there are no people from the humanities in these teams. We have to start introducing the social and the cultural dimension in these debates. Because when we discuss nature, we are never talking simply about nature. When we talk about restoration practice that want to establish moving from an existing state to a desired state, what is the desired state? What is the baseline of this desired state on a landscape that has been shaped and reshaped by millennia of climate change and intensive human use? wild? Do we have wild nature? We have hybrid nature. Humans have been shaping the earth since they are here. So the idea of restoring dunes to bare sands is often an attempt to return to a previous landscape that was not natural in the first place. It was often the consequence of intensive grazing and intense human use. So what is the ecological fidelity that we are talking about when we talk about restoration, where we have successive layers of human context history as part of these systems? That doesn't mean that I do not support restoration. It means that we have to acknowledge that some of these practices are subjective. And we have to question, what are we doing? With what baselines? For what? And this is my point. For nature itself? Nature for nature? Or for human sake, as we have been doing most of the time? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was super nice and very provocative there at the end. So I would like to start. I'll make a general question, and then I'll open for questions, and hopefully you'll have many questions. Otherwise, I'll have others here. But let's start with one that I think all of you would be interesting to hear from all of you, and with a more pragmatical view, given that we have the FCT people here. So given the importance of everything that you've been talking about, given that this is such an interdisciplinary project, issues, given that you need to link with policy, but you also need to link with people and farmers. So how do you think the sort of studies that we're talking about, some of them are even intervention studies, how can we do them? What sort of instruments should we have in Portugal, finding political instruments to actually promote the sort of studies that we would need in Portugal and together with the EU, I guess, to do this? That would link, all the different expertises that we have in here, plus linking with policy and with people. Anyone wants to start? Henrique, do you want to start? So we go like this?
I think that the realization that we need to bring the humanities and the social sciences to the discussion of landscape management has been increasing in the last 15 years. For instance, in IPBES, and Helena will know much better than me, but we've been trying to get more social scientists and humanities scientists nominated for the work of IPBES. And it's always a challenge to get enough scientists from those fields nominated. I think that in reality, all our ideas of nature are social constructs. So yes, it's impossible to have a dialogue or an assessment of what we want for nature if we don't engage with the social and with social sciences and humanities. And that's in reality what we try to do with the Nature Futures, is showing that there is, even when we think about nature as positive, there is different positives. There is different ways of thinking about what is positive nature. And that work has been done, of course, with a lot of social science and geographers. And I think that's important, but it has also been done historically in Portugal to some extent, because the conservation movement that really took off in the 70s in Portugal with the creation of a lot of protected areas, a lot of the people involved in the conservation movement came from landscape architecture, what is a bit of an interdisciplinary field, between resource management, ecology, a bit of geography. And we had, just to mention one name, Rewilding, that was really inspiring for an entire generation of how we think about green infrastructure in Portugal and elsewhere. And so there is a history we can build on, but I think we need to continue this effort of having a dialogue between biologists, resource managers, foresters, agricultural scientists, geographers, economists, other social scientists, historians, very, very important history. I think that dialogue is essential to any assessment of how to manage landscapes.
Okay, Helena, in a pragmatic way, what sort of instruments should be there to promote the dialogue?
I will go for it. But anyway, but I have to say, but maybe I use your example of the sand dunes. I finished my biology graduation in the sand dunes of Figueira da Foz in the center of Portugal. This is one of my favorite ecosystems, I have to confess. I love sand dunes. And you brought this example of Ammophila arnaria, which is a native species, as you said, and it's essential, it's critical for this ecosystem. And you approach it very nicely. I mean, the sand dunes, the history and what has been done in many countries, because this idea, it is an old idea, means for centuries also in Portugal, that preserving the sand dune, I mean, for you to remember our king, our Dom Dinis and all this, preserving the sand dunes is critical in order to prevent the advance of the sand and also and so to protect the communities and the people. So this is something that even all of us have, and we understand it. But this species, we knew that, but for some time, there was this idea that we should protect the sand dunes, the advancement of the sand dunes, to build houses, because basically we've been transforming the sand dune ecosystem by building in the, let's say it's an ecological succession, in the second dune basically is destroyed all over Portugal. We basically preserved the first dune, a tiny piece of the first dune. In some places we have a bit of the second dune, but basically we have transformed the second dune to build cities, villages, and anything. But we realized that some of the houses were threatened by the sea and the advance of the sand. So at some point we spent a lot of money in the 90s, in the beginning of the century, buying, putting these sticks, in the sand, so you can see it, and they are spreading all over the sand, because in the beach it's because of a lot of these sticks. Because why? Because we figure out, we have decided to put this engineering way of building and preventing the advancement of the sand, using these sticks as a technical intervention in the sand dune. But what is the difference? And that's why sometimes we dialogue. But you also need specific science and knowledge in many aspects, and that's why I'm bringing this topic. Because the difference is that the Ammophila arnaria, it's a species that is so connected, so well designed to fit in the dune, that the species grows when the sun comes. It can't grow, imagine, 20 centimeters per week. It grows. So it responds to the movement of the sand. So you don't have the plant spread in the dunes, because we know that this species is so well adapted to this ecosystem that's why we use it, that's why you've been using it. There's an empirical knowledge that was used to put this particular species in this ecosystem. But we decided to bring these new technologies. And so we have, of course, the stick doesn't grow. And if we don't replace it, what is happening with the sun? Of course, it will just go and pollute the ecosystem. So this dialogue, we need it, and we are trying to establish. But there is a lot of knowledge that is field-specific, and it is also needed. And you have the huge challenge and is how to establish dialogues, In a way, you need field knowledge, that is, of course, needed, but at the same time, of course, you have to dialogue and to understand how to build it. And that's probably one of the tricky issues of this, okay? So, but we keep spending a lot, and then come the policies. We keep spending, you may have a lot of municipality technicians thinking that it's worth to keep preventing the movement of the dunes by using these artificial sticks. They are not going to work, but we keep spending money, probably part of the recovery funds, maybe used in the sand dunes control, is being used there, okay? So another aspect, we need to inform the policies with science, and also, I mean, to prevent what is the loss of money, the waste of money, and put the money where we need. So we don't have this in terms of the policy, and that's the second aspect that I would like to bring, because at the same time it's interesting to see, and I have to congratulate FCT because of this. Portugal, because the recent decision of the FCT, we are going to support officially, we have supported officially IPES, finally. There is also, we are changing also, and this is very important to see that our agency is going to support IPES exactly because we feel that there's a need to support more researchers, the scientific community, to go from social sciences, humanities, all sorts of, but we need to do it. So from this year on is not much, but we are officially committed to support IPBES because we need, and FCT and the agency and the ministry decided so. So I'm very happy to announce it because it's going to be publicly announced one of these days, I don't know. But anyway, there is a change of the understanding of the policy. So biodiversity is indeed coming into, but your question is, so I'm sorry, but I had to.
Yeah, just try to wrap up now and pragmatically,
I will go. Say? No, because of the policies and
yes.
This is a level of policy that is extremely important for science, because having this support and this commitment of FCT, it's much easier for me or any of us, to join the communities and really to participate in this reporting, and I'm myself committed to bring in as much as possible and to share and to send CVs from social sciences, and my research center, as you know, involves historians, so I'm very much in favor of that. But in terms of policy, was your specific questions. How can we bring in? Well, I think that is happening in many ways. Henrique brought some of these policies that were not. It was not easy to really have accepted and approved the restoration law, for example. It was a huge achievement for Europe. The time was not the best, so it was not 100% support. It was fantastic. Now we have to develop this plan up to September 2026, the national plans. National plans are critical. We need to have more of this. So this is when we fail. We fail when we don't have this. If I ask who knows about this, we are probably all biodiversity community. Who is aware of the schedule, the launching, the process of the nature restoration plan, the national restoration plan? Probably it's happening, it's ongoing, so we should be preparing it. Who is aware of it? Probably, I don't know how many of us are aware of this process.
But it's a great opportunity actually to join the community from different fields and work together on something that's a national mission.
It's critical, and I just hope that the methodology will allow people to participate in the process. So this is just an example, and if I have time, we'll go back.
Thank you, Helena. Joanna.
Well, I think we already have the policies and the tools that we need. What we have to change is mentalities. We are discussing transdisciplinarity for the last decades, but we do not really do it. And I would say that one of the problems is, because I work more with scientists than historians in the last years, scientists know, or most of them know, that they need people from the humanities But they are not people from the humanities or historians working about these kind of issues. And I would ask the audience, how many of you here today are from social sciences and humanities?
What?
Not many, because this is a conference about biodiversity and sustainability, right? And that is the problem. We don't have many people in the humanities interested in this kind of issues, and we need to change that. And also, we need that the ones that are working in climate change and environmental issues start asking and inviting more people to be part of their teams. So I think it has to start in academia.
But maybe even on a training of people, not to have more directed training, to make it
Yes.
clear that this is a path that people can take.
Yes, and this training has to be transdisciplinary, otherwise it would be impossible. We do not, I didn't learn about dunes at the university, not at my school, of course. I had to learn it with scientists. So we have to work with each other and really work with each other.
Right, thank you. So we open the questions to the public. Okay. Okay, we have a question there and one in the back. Okay, maybe we can put it to questions. I would ask you to be concise and also to direct the question. If the question is to one person in particular, just direct it. It will be easier for us.
Okay, good morning. Cristina Magos from C3C and Change, and it's a pleasure to see all of you. So I have two questions. One is to Joana, and maybe to the others the same. But don't you think that we need a new language? What I mean is, in order to be transdisciplinary, in order to have a dialogue, don't we need to learn also a language, a common language between social scientists and more natural scientists or more specific scientists? And the other question is for maybe to Henrique and to Helena, and I think that already have been discussed in the final of your some minutes ago. It's this huge opportunity that is to the discussion, and in present times, it's publicly to discuss the national or the future national biodiversity strategy. So would you like, about instruments that Monica just asked, I'd like that you mention one or 2 points that you think is crucial in order to have the best biodiversity strategy that we may have.
Very good. And the question on the back, so that we put everything together, it will be easier. It's there. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentations. I find them inspiring. I'm Antonieta Cunhissá. I'm the scientific director of the Knowledge Center, the Nova School of Business and Economics Knowledge Center. And so I would like my question or a comment and a question is Professor Henrique Pereira. I found it very interesting and very, in fact, it's key that in order to preserve, we know that we have to understand the value that people attribute to the different ecosystems. So I think that I was very interested on, in fact, this putting together the natural science with economics or environmental economics. And I would like also so this was really inspiring. And besides that, I would like to ask, what do you think about how relevant you think that, to have this natural capital accounting are for this, for the future and for the future of preservation of ecosystem services. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Joana, do you want to start with the language?
Sim, eu vou responder em português.
Okay. Do we have, do we have people in the audience that don't talk Portuguese?
Eu vou responder em português porque a minha resposta para a Cristina tem que ser em português por uma questão de terminologia. Eu acho que...
And you can summarize in one sentence in English afterwards.
Eu acho que nós não precisamos de nova linguagem, nós temos é que conversar. E eu dirigi durante algum tempo uma equipa interdisciplinar e nas primeiras sessões do projeto tentei explicar aos meus colaboradores, muitos da Faculdade de Ciências, como é que se fazia a história. E falava de fontes históricas, fontes, e a certa altura uma colega de Geologia perguntou-me assim: Joana, mas o que é que são fontes? É que para mim fontes são aquela coisa que jorra água. Pronto, isto é um exemplo de como as palavras podem querer dizer coisas muito diferentes. E o segundo exemplo é este. Eu tenho assistido nestes últimos anos, pelo tipo de trabalho que faço, vou a muitas conferências na área da gestão costeira e das ciências. E fui aprendendo todo um conjunto de terminologias e às vezes é preciso fazer palavras. E eu sou a pessoa que, numa conferência de geologia costeira, a certa altura interrompe a conferência para perguntar o que são foraminíferos. E toda a gente olhou para mim e disse, e pensou assim, mas quem é aquela criatura que não sabe o que são foraminíferos? Eu disse, eu sou de História, desculpem. Explicaram-me o que era, eu disse, muito bem, então podem continuar. Ou seja, às vezes é preciso fazermos perguntas e não termos medo de as fazer, porque quando conversamos com pessoas de outras áreas, não sabemos tudo. E o diálogo é fundamental, e conversar. E termino.
Okay, so the answer is dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. Okay, next questions? Or do you want to make a point about the language issue? Or next point was about the strategy plan and how to make it the best possible plan.
Well, the biodiversity strategy it's under public hearing, public discussion, so it's worth to mention it. But it's exactly a case where you can see, I mean, this was supposed to happen, I mean, this is probably, the last one was, 2001, and maybe, so, I mean, we don't know, this is one of the processes that I think that in Portugal is failing, is we don't really stick to the, to the planning. So we have this document, it was predicted to happen, to have a kind of reassessment every 3 years, every 5 years. But on the other hand, it's true that is an interesting point also to bring in, because it's an interministerial strategy, meaning that all the sectors of the public policy are involved. So you have the Ministry for Economy, the Ministry for Research, so we have all the ministries. So we do have some platforms at the high level where the sectoral policies are involved, and in principle they should, give insights from the different sectors, and this is, but the problem is that it's not, working as it should be, because, we have the process, but the methodology is not, but it's a fact that is also an opportunity to participate in the process and to share whatever we think it's important for the future. So it's, of course, an important document, and I'm happy to acknowledge it. I would also go to the natural capital accounting, but I leave it to Henrique first.
So I wanted to give some pragmatic thoughts about the three questions that were mentioned. One is this interdisciplinarity. And I was just at the University of Minho remotely a couple of weeks ago on their biannual conference on education. Yeah. And we had this similar question came up. And the issue there for me is that the Bologna process that I'm an adept of, that I think helped us harmonize the degrees across Europe, and very important. But we had an option at a given moment of going for the 3+2 or the 4+2 model. And we went to the 3+2 model. What was the consequence of that? If there was already little space for studying outside your discipline, now there is even less space. The 3 years of the bachelor's are super specialized. And so we went the reverse direction of what I think we should have gone in the reform of the bachelor degrees with the Bologna process. And I think it's time to make a bit of a reflection. And can we restructure the bachelor programs again to make them more interdisciplinary? I think this is really key, and I think that's a role that FCT can also promote. But the second aspect that we mentioned, the nature restoration regulation, the nature restoration plans, very aggressive timeline, next year already, it's extraordinary aggressive timeline. But there is one, and you're mentioning national biodiversity strategy, but there is an issue that is also very interesting, that is the connection between research and management, or research and regulation. Most countries have, I don't know if it's most, but many countries in Europe, the National Regulation Authority of Biodiversity has also research, or either a strong research units, or collaborates with a lab, a national lab for biodiversity research. I worked at the ECNB for a few years when I was park director, and I remember having strong arguments at the time of restructuring ICN, the Instituto para a Conservação da Natureza e da Biodiversidade, where I was proposing that we should have a strong, small research unit in ICN to link the National Biodiversity Authority to research. And there was a huge resistance. But now that with my experience, international experience, I can see that what I was proposing is what is almost mainstream in the most developed countries in Europe. All the national biodiversity authorities have a strong link to research. Then we have the associated labs process, and I think there was also an opportunity there through in BU to establish these links, and we have done a lot of these. I think Nun Ferran, that I see here in the audience, has done a lot of this effort over the last 20 years, really, to try to link the National Biodiversity Authority with research. But I wonder how many people from ICNF are here today? There's not a single person in the audience. This is the authority that has to do the national restoration plans in 1 year. That needs to be connected to research. There is no one. So we have a huge challenge here. It's a political challenge, needs some kind of real reform, where we bring research into biodiversity management through stronger links between the national biodiversity research labs, the associated labs, with the authorities, but also by getting, in my opinion, we do need a unit, a part of the ECNB with research responsibilities. Last point.
Can be risky.
Last point on the natural capital accounting. It's something very important to do, but also very challenging. We have been trying to do that for 20 years. The basis of this go back more than 25 years. We have been discussing how to do natural capital accounting. And being here in the Nova School of Business, I think what I'm going to say maybe is well understood. The problem about biodiversity and natural capital is that there are no established markets for these goods. They are public goods, and the issue there is many of these accounting and valuation, like this choice experiment I showed, is about theoretical markets. There is now some markets being established, but it's still not a transaction in most cases where you sell something tangible. So it's a lot about intangibles, public goods, and there is a lot of challenge in doing this well. But of course, we need to collaborate with economists and with the brightest economists to really bring natural capital into national GDP projections and national policy.
Thank you.
Can I just briefly comment on that? Because I'm also...
We have the 000 there.
No, because I think it's because it's related to... I mean, I've been involved also in this ecosystem service framework from the beginning, and at some point I thought this should be on hold because the communities are not prepared for this framework. But now, I mean, we all accept that it's probably time, and I mean, it's urgent to bring in. But I'm involved in one particular national plan, so I'm going into Portugal. We are one of the processes that is trying to apply this natural capital accounting at the landscape level is done by the DGT, Direção-Geral do Território, in what they call PGRP, plans for landscape planning, which is units, territorial units of 40,000 hectares, more or less, and they've been launching 20 of them. I was involved in 3 of them, one in COA actually, and it was a landscape plan where, I mean, the critical aspect, one of the critical agendas was to bring in ecosystem services and try to use it as a process of framing the economy of this unit, landscape unit. And so we did the planning as the best we could. And now I was in Viseu 2 days ago for the public discussion, and one of these plans in the region that we have the river Paiva. We had a lot of burnings and fires as you remember, last year. It's really a critical situation. We are losing a lot of shepherds, so there's a big transformation ongoing. And we expected it to be somehow well perceived by the communities in order to start using this process. But what is missing? I mean, we have the plan, we can start using, we have money even because of the recovery plan. There's some money that is going to be in the process. But, I mean, we don't have, I mean, we lost the trust. In many of these lands, we lost trust. There's not trust in the process anymore. So you have to bring it, and this is because our political choices are not consistent. So if this is going to be a policy that is going to be strategic for the future of the land, and we do need that, you know, because in the room, we had, for example, people claiming to have, instead of forests, having photovoltaics and having new panels of energy, because it's perceived as much more, I mean, profitable nowadays. That used to be, for example, the forest. Pine trees, eucalyptus trees are not anymore profitable in this specific situation. So if we want, and it is to be critical, I'm very much in favor of this, but if we want to have ecosystem services as part of the planning, then this has to be a political choice. And this is a step that is really far away, you know. And if you go to the landscape, you have to realize that in Portugal, we don't have regional power. We have decisions that are centralized, basically, and then you don't have, I mean, then you have the municipalities. The municipalities have no power at this level to decide this kind of policies. So this has to be a political choice, if we want it, and I'm very much in favor of it.
Thank you very much. Joanna, would you like to give like a final sentence of something that you'd like to change in the next 5 years towards biodiversity management?
Well, I want to put
one sentence, because we are finishing.
Yes, put history on the map of sustainability.
Very good. We have all these scientists around. I think everyone should be pushing towards that. Henrique?
Thank you, Monica.
A sentence?
I think this issue of linking the National Biodiversity Authority, I'm going to repeat myself, yes, but I think it's so fundamental to national research, biodiversity research. It's really important.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess you were also talking about policy, Helena, so if you...
my final word is biodiversity. Biodiversity relates to all of us. It's critical for our future together. So let's protect biodiversity.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank the speakers, Vera, for suggesting the speakers, which I think it was a super nice panel and more diverse in conversation than what we normally have, and hope we all learn from that and to be more multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary when thinking about this problem. Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you.
Está terminada a primeira sessão plenária do dia de hoje. Lembramos que as sessões paralelas desta manhã vão decorrer entre as 11h30 e as 13 horas e que as sessões paralelas da tarde decorrem entre as 14h30 e as 16 horas. Toda a informação está disponível no site e na app do Encontro Ciência. Muito obrigado.